Hi, and welcome, and thank you for joining in to our second in the series of the Homeland webinar sessions. This one is now on the E145s control board, which is our new one. Hopefully you all had a good Easter bank holiday break and were able to spend the time with your household family. I, for one, had a good parenting win with teaching my daughter to ride her bike without stabilizers, without falling over once. So that's a win for me. Each session that we're going to be doing will be split into a main presentation lasting around about 15 minutes with a Q&A session afterwards. And they'll be held every Wednesday, the next one being on the 21st of April at 10:30 on the new E844 control board for our three-phase sliding gate operators. As mentioned before, there'll be a Q&A session after the main presentation itself. We currently have 39 people watching. So depending on the number of questions, I may not have enough time to answer all of them live. But I'll leave a comment next to any unanswered questions. So just please log in later and check a response for me. As before with last week's on the solar panel, in a few hours, you will essentially get an email to basically say that this webinar is now available as a replay. So you'll be able to watch again and just go through anything you might have missed, pause it, and essentially as you want to do with it. So we start with it. So I'm just bringing that presentation up on the screen. There we go. Hopefully this is now up and on your screen instead. Here we go. So this is essentially the E145s control board. That's what it is on the little picture on the right-hand side. What we're going to be looking through is essentially a bit of an introduction, obviously the key features, the main changes, what they mean, our new direct safety edge terminal connections. Also, we're going to look at encoders, the retrofit types, and the general requirements needed for encoders anyway. Then we're looking at some E145s programming overview, connectivity, and just a quick bit about our new E145s quick start guide I created a couple of weeks ago. So, new E145s control board is for obviously 230 volt systems. It's now available off the shelf, and this replaces the E145 control board, and has been introduced in preparation for the launch of SimplyConnect later in the year. The E145s obviously still maintains the same facility as the E145 in that it can still operate a sliding gate, as well as swing gates, and the mixed systems are still possible. Obviously has a much larger microprocessor and memory capacity, which will essentially allow us to bring more features over to the market to you as and when they are available, and still cross-compatible with existing installations, a newer wide range switching power supply, and one of the most important changes on the control board, the integrated safety edge inputs. What are the main changes? What are they? What they actually mean? We've changed the biggest change that anyone will notice is the switching power supply module. It's now fully encapsulated, which removes the need for the little clear plastic cover we had over the top of it before. So it's a little bit easier for fitting it and removing it and doing cleaning and stuff behind the board, that kind of stuff. The other part as well that you get is the new switching power supply that's on there has a much greater operating range. So essentially allows you to work much better, more reliable, especially in older properties where the mains can be a little bit iffy from time to time. Hence where the new switching power supply comes into its own. Obviously, as I said, one of the biggest changes we've got is the two new independent, new again, 8.2 kiloohms, normally closed switch safety edge inputs are now provided. We get one for opening and one for closing. This will allow you for a direct connection of resistive safety edges to the control board without the need for an additional safety edge controller like our FAAC E145s or or any other type of hardwired systems. It has the SimplyConnect compatibility. This allows for the programming from a tablet app and also remote diagnostics of the system, either via a LAN Wi-Fi connection or a GSM system. It's a GSM as in a GSM on the chip, so there's no SIM cards you need to fit in. It just already has a SIM card attached to it. Also, it's backwards compatible with E145 programming, but you will need a USB key in order to get spacing for the new safety edge terminals. The USB USB connector had to remove, so you can't do the direct connection like you used to with the EasyBoard software. But instead, you can still use a USB key to create programs and then load it back onto the board. There's a section on this PowerPoint that actually shows going through that itself. Now, I've been saying about these new direct safety edge terminals. So as you can see, they'll essentially end up in the bottom right-hand corner of the actual control board. They have their own respective LEDs, so they're easy for you to do fault diagnostics. When you get them, a new board, these will actually be pre-linked out, much in the same way that the standard stop circuit, opening safety and closing safety are linked out on the board as it comes out of the box. Those are also linked out because the default setting on the edges is for a normally closed contact. As I said before, there are two different inputs. One is for opening safety only, and the other is for closing safety instead. And their default is normally closed, but you can change it to a resistive edge circuit. Now, the bit to remember is that you can each input can only have one resistor at a time. You can't put more resistors in parallel. But we have carried out internal tests ourselves, and we were able to get a minimum of 8 safety edges wide, all in series together. If I remember correctly, they're all 1.7 meters safety edges, and all with 2 meters of leads coming out of them, with one end of line resistor, and the system was able to work correctly and do everything as what it was meant to do. Obviously, that gives us a potential 16 hardwired safety edges on the system, 8 on the opening, 8 on the closing. The other thing as well that I would suggest, this is where, with the safety edges, this is where our expert line safety system would come in quite handy, because you can obviously make up the edges on site. So it makes your life a little bit easier. The other way that you can use these terminals as well is for the connection of wireless safety edge controllers, without needing to change one of the other inputs, because normally you change the opening safety input or the closing safety input or a stop circuit and change to a safety edge circuit. So you have, like, you can do safety edges and photocells separate from each other. Because we now have these inputs, if users normally closed, you can still do the category 2 failsafe checking on them, can still be done. Now, we're going to go into the encoders, essentially just to make sure that everybody is all aware and how to retrofit them in general requirements. The SafeCoder kit is quite easy to retrofit when you are doing a board on an E145 or an E145s, but there are some key points which we need to make sure that everything works correctly. So the most important are those 2 little asterisks. First one, for part number 1, is basically the encoder bracket. You need to take the motor off to put that bracket on, because it needs to slide in over the actual bracket itself. It's quite difficult to clip it on, and usually results in a break of the arm that obviously holds it in place on there. The second, and even more important, which is the number 2, is the existing rear U fork that you have on the motor. You need to take it off the motor and flip it upside down, because the orientation that you can see on the screen right now, this is in the way it should go back in. It should go back in this way around. This is so that as you can see, there's a little white bit around the magnetic pin, number 3. When it goes in, that white bit is like the shape of a nut, essentially. That holds in that slot at the top. And when it's there, it basically means that the encoder pin can only rotate with the motor. So it doesn't really make much difference what's going on underneath, because it can only move with the motor itself. As a word of note, it is just obviously making sure if you are doing as a retrofit to an old installation, it might be worth you actually checking the bush that the pin goes through actually on the rear bracket itself. It might have been worn if it's been installed for quite a large number of years. The 770 encoder. The 770N also has a SafeCoder kit that you can fit. Again, it's quite easy to fit. One of the things you might have noticed is with 770Ns is they seem to come with this little white plastic bit that kind of goes over the on figure 01, which kind of goes over the spindle. Basically, that is in advance of being able to fit a encoder onto it. You basically take that a little bit off. You get a new magnet encoder. That goes in. There's a little plastic cap that you get, and you basically smack it down, basically to keep it so it doesn't move around. Once you've done that, you take the little cap off and you mount the encoder. Again, when you are fitting the actual encoder, it basically takes the place of the nut that holds one of the legs down on the 770N. You basically take that off, and you put the big stud bit. There's a little bit, and you can see like in 2A. And you put it down, and on a standard 110 or 140 degree kit system, it goes on the side closest to the parcel shelf. If you are doing a 180 kit with the cogs, it essentially goes on the opposite side because otherwise it won't actually fit. But it's the same part number that you don't need to actually change anything. It's just where it fits changes slightly. The other bits, there are some general encoder requirements that are something you need to have a look at. You need to use a minimum of a 2-core, 0.5mm per core, ideally multi-strand cable, and should be a shielded cable. And the shielding has to be connected to an earth point at one end. Reason being is bus. Bus is a comms and power down the same 2 cores. So if you're using an unshielded cable like, say, a Cat5, you could get induction going across from other cabling or anything like that going through. And what it tends to happen is you get what I refer to as a build-up of error. So, it works perfectly fine for a few goes, but essentially you're getting a tiny little error building up each time. And then you get to a point where the board says, no, this isn't quite right. And then it gives you an error saying there's an obstacle detection, even though the gate seems to be in the closed position. That's essentially what's happened. The other bit is the LEDs on the encoders themselves. It's the same doesn't really matter which type of encoders you have. They all basically have 3 LEDs. And you'll see the motor 1 has 2 LEDs and motor 2 has 1 LED. You've got to make sure they're the right way around and match up to the correct motor. Otherwise, we'll get very confused. What do they actually mean, and why is it that motor 1 has 2 and motor 2 has 1? Essentially, because the first one, DL1, is power. When it's on, it basically means you've got power and it can see something else that it's talking to. If it flashes, it means it's got power, but it can't talk to something. Usually what happens when you use like a low quality cable or you're getting induction. DL2, which is the one that causes the confusion, is essentially when it's lit, it's basically saying, I am motor 1. Or I am encoder 1. When it's not lit, I am encoder 2. And the third one is one that basically it's either on or it's off or it flashes when the gate moves. One thing as well that I like to just make sure people are aware is if you make any changes on the bus system, even if you change like a like-for-like system, like you take off an encoder and put another encoder back in, it is always best to readdress the bus. It's a relatively simple process. All you need to do is navigate to the bus parameter and you hold the plus and minus together for 5 seconds until a white comes up, and then you just exit the program, and that's it. Coming into the E145s programming overview. In order to get your system up and running, you generally only ever really this is like just to get it running, just to make the motors open and close on the commands, etc. This isn't like a finished system, but just to get up and running, all you generally need to do is access the basic functions. The main changes you'll see on here, obviously I'm not going to go through all the parameters now, but the main thing you'll see on here changes are the SO and the SC parameter in the second table that we have on here. That essentially is the safety edges, is where you configure them to where you want them to be. The other thing that is useful here in this parameter is obviously the bus. This is where you do the bus registrations in the upper level, and you've got the dead man system and you've got the timelining. So you do most of your programming straight on this level. The advanced functions, that's where you have your final closing strokes, your reverse strokes, your decelerations that you can set up, and your encoder, anti-crushing sensitivity. One of the things I'll say with the encoders, if you are fitting like gates onto, like, say, large bordered gates, and you're using force testing as your safety system, the encoders will probably need to be switched right down to minimum sensitivity. It's essentially you can't get an encoder that's going to be able to pick up the difference between a stall from a wind or a stall from hitting somebody. So if you trying to use the encoders for actual safety in that sense and it's on big boarded gates, be wary because that could be problematic. On large boarded gates, would always recommend the use of safety edges or X guards, laser curtains. If obviously the fitting of safety edges isn't really practical or it's not aesthetically pleasing to the customer on there. Now, if you are using force limitations, these are the parameters you're really going to be going to go through. Obviously, you've got force 1 and force 2, which is the motor forces. Just remember, as it's written on there, if you are using hydraulic operators, the force from the control board is always maximum, but you need to adjust those bypass screws on the actual motors themselves. You should be able to hold a gate against the bypass. So essentially, it shouldn't be trying to drag you along with it. Obviously, encoders help with force limitations because essentially it tells the gate and knows the gate exactly where it is. So it's always more helpful to have that facility. The closing delays, again, obviously to make sure that you get if you are using closing delay, you have a half-meter gap between one gate and the other. And the R1 and the R2, which are the decelerations. Obviously, I already said about the EC. The R8, the last parameter on there, we get a few people to ask questions. What does it actually mean? It's essentially, am I close enough? That's the way to look at it as a description. Am I close enough to my endpoint to be there? So if you get a gate that's is regularly stopping, let's say 30 mil short of where it should be, you might just need to adjust that R8 parameter. Basically, say you need to be a bit tighter because essentially it gets to a point where if the encoder says stops and it's within like 1 degree where it should be, as far as the board's concerned, depending on the parameter setting on the R8, it might just go, it's close enough. Now, one of the things that we have said as well is the E145s, you can't do a direct connection to a laptop using the EasyBoard software. You can still use the EasyBoard software instead, but we now need to use a USB key to obviously, because we've allowed the firmware on the new control board to allow it to accept that, to take the programming from a EasyBoard. The only thing you can't access the timer functionality. It doesn't work, nor do the accessories, which weren't really used before anyway. And obviously the event register doesn't pick up anything from there. But if you want to change the programming, this is a quick guide which I'll run through relatively quickly for you. But obviously you bring it up and you change your motors. This is also where you can have a mixed system. We have a few people that have done this already, where you have two motors and one of them is a sliding gate and the other one can be a swing gate. So you might have, say, a 42 PED, pedestrian operated with an encoder, for example. That is your pedestrian gates, that's where the postman goes through and all that kind of stuff. And the other side, you might be using a sliding gate motor instead. All gets run from one unit. You have one set of safety devices that is essentially covering your system as it is. You obviously configure your inputs, configure your locks. This is also quite handy because our control board has a lock output. The lock output is designed to control a 12-volt AC electric strike lock. If you want to control a 24-volt, mag lock, we recommend a relay get fitted, and we would normally suggest to use these inputs. We just change the type of lock from FAAC to a non-FAAC lock, and then it becomes a standard 24-volt DC input that you can use, DC output that you can use as you wish. In the limits, if you want to adjust the limits, you can adjust the what the triggers do on the receiver cards. So you might want to actually disable the second receiver so nobody can just randomly start adding a pedestrian command onto it, or you can have button 2 is actually a close command. And lastly, you can change the logic. Once you've done all of that, you then need to make sure you write the file, save this somewhere on your desktop, and then take that file and you put it to a little USB key. and then you put that USB key goes into the little socket on the new E145s. That goes on there, you plug it in, and you download the new file, and all you need to do is run a setup. You can still go in and change pulse times. You can still change the forces onto it. It just then will be more globally applied onto it. But you can still make changes to it, but there are some bits you only be able to access again by basically redoing the software on the laptop and replugging back into the unit again. And the other bit we have is, for your convenience, I created a E145s quick start guide. It's available on my website. It essentially has all the relevant information in one place. And it's only just in English, so there's no multiple language settings inside. If you go to our website and search for the E145s, you'll see it on there. There's a link to it. Also, you can look on here and just copy this address afterwards. As always, we recommend that the full manual is read in conjunction with the quick start guide before you obviously make a start on the install. So if I just now go back to my other screen, and we'll see, get to here. Here we go. So that is essentially the end of the main presentation. And obviously took a little bit longer than I expected, but this is obviously where we come up to any questions. So let's see if we anyone has got any questions as of yet. As I said, if you think of questions afterwards, then you can just populate them on here, and then I can have a look of them at them afterwards. Let's see, is anything on here yet? No, nothing as far. So hopefully, this has been something you guys would like to see. And the next one that we're going to do next Wednesday on the 21st will be on the new E844 sliding gate motor, where it's a sorry, not motor, control board for our three-phase systems instead. So again, it's a brand new control board that we've got out. So hopefully we'll get it sorted. Cool. We do have a question from Tony. So the new control board you cannot run set up through the laptop. Not directly, no. You'd need to. You still take your laptop, but you just don't have direct connection onto it. It's been designed for the new Simply Connect modules, which we have some on test at the moment, the pre-beta prototypes, which would then allow you to just essentially run from a laptop, from a tablet, so you don't have to actually plug anything into it. But at this precise moment in time, you don't get the live connection that you did with the E145. You have to do like an in-between step where you download the file to a USB key, and then you just plug the USB key into it instead. Peter, has it got a built-in receiver? No, you need to add a XF 868 receiver, 39007, if I remember rightly, which plugs into the top of the board horizontally, and that uses the OmniDeck system. So it gets it's the XF is essentially a glorified aerial that plugs in and uses the onboard's receiver. It's just that you can't do anything with the onboard receiver until you plug the aerial in. Okay, David, is there a way of adding multiple edges to the edge inputs in parallel like you can on the CN60? How would you recommend multiple resistive safety edges? If you're going to hardwire them in, this is where the expert line system comes in handy, because you can connect them all in series quite easily with it, because at the moment you can only do essentially one resistive input going into it. So it will be, you can only do the one. If you're going to do multiple resistive safety edges, I would probably suggest either going into the CN60 like you did before, and then just using the inputs, the normally close function on the inputs instead, just so you can have something dedicated for where they wire into specifically, or you'd wire the wireless kit will get wired in there as well. And then from the wireless kit, you can either use the resistive output, or you can use the the normally closed outputs instead. Okay, next one. Nigel, dedicated input for safety edges to be added onto E124 board. I believe we are working on a new 24 control board, but I have no idea when that will get done. Essentially, that would be one of the iterators that I would expect would be on the control board by default. And Peter, what can we do with the GSM facility? The GSM facility that we will use with the Simply Connect is essentially just a way to connect to the board. So your tablet would essentially connect like via the internet, and it will just connect to it directly by the cloud. So you can then talk to it, interrogate it, program it, basically do anything that you could do with the EasyBoard and more. There is a lot more functionality attached to it than what you could before. The GSM module is just simply like the Wi-Fi LAN module. It just has a GSM built into it, so you don't have to actually do anything in terms of like networks, etc. You just basically plug it in, turn it on, and it will find the nearest, most powerful signal that it has around it for you to communicate with it. Let's see if there's anything else. Any other questions? Or is that it for now? Okay. Check. I think that's it. So hopefully you've enjoyed this webinar, and I look forward to seeing you on to the next one. As I said, remember, it's next Wednesday at 21st of April at 10:30, same time as always. Okay. Many thanks. To one last minute check. Yep. No more question. Cool. That's fine. All right. Take care, guys. Keep safe.